So we have this interesting interlude in Luke 22. If you remember, we've gone all the way from verse 1, which introduces Luke introduces to us the setting. It's the Passover. It's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's Thursday, the 14th of Nisan. And so Passover is what's happening. And we find, too, that in verse 2, there's the setting of the vitriol in the location. That is to say, the chief priests, the scribes, they were seeking how they might take him in order to kill him. It's like, wow, that puts a damper on the whole situation, doesn't it? We find that this is where Judas was deceived by the devil. The devil found a home, and you believe this, right in what we would call the church, because there's no other way to describe how the 12 apostles are around Jesus. He's in the center, the 12 are around him. It's a company of God, and yet Satan enters in to one of the 12, and probably among one of the saddest commentaries in human history is verse 3. So that's the setting. Then we find a second event within the week in verses 7 through 13, in which Jesus gave a job to two of the disciples. He had given a job to two of the disciples on the morning of the triumphal entry, so last Sunday, and said where to go and what to do and what to say. And in verse 7 through 13, the same thing. 4 days later, different location, different people, but the same result. Jesus said, go do this this is going to happen, and if this, then just say this, and so they did. And verse 13 says, so they prepared the Passover. So Peter and John were the ones assigned to do that, and they did. Verses 14 through 23 actually break that up. Verses 14 through 18, we find we're in the upper room, we're at the dinner, and everything is going what you would call according to plan, until Jesus throws some interesting monkey wrenches into the system by including in the event the disciples in at least one of the things which was only his to do. And then he, in verses 14 through 18, points forward to, okay, this is it. This is it. No more will I do this until I eat it with you or drink it with you in the kingdom. Okay, well, we know historically that he is simply hours away from the big Judas encounter in the garden, and then the Sanhedrin and Annas and Caiaphas and Herod and Pilate, all those monkey trials. So we know that, but here they are still sitting at the dinner, and he makes this announcement. Then we get into the Lord's Supper instituted in verses 19 and 20, and then Jesus then at the end of the meal saying, in essence, toward the end of the meal, one of you is going to betray me. And verse 23 leaves us, or that's where it left us last week, with they began to discuss among themselves which one of them it might be who is going to do this, my word, dastardly thing, this horrible thing. So, all of that to say then, when we get to verse 24 and this passage, which I will read in just a moment, when we get to verse 24, it begins with the word, and it came to pass, or it came about, or it happened. And with our understanding of Luke, the author, Luke, the writer, he has more than once not been concerned with, at 9 o'clock this, at 10 o'clock this, at 11 o'clock this, at 12 o'clock this. He will do what you sometimes do with the Yahtzee thing, shake it up and then spill it out. So that 11 o'clock is here, followed by 9, 10, and 12. It's like, what'd you do that for? Well, I can't say why Luke, the writer, writes the way he does, just to tell you that he does write the way he does. So, all that to tell you by way of introduction to verse 24, that it came to pass that a certain something happened. If we read it in the Bible chronologically, then what we have is this situation. We just had this wonderful dinner. We've just now had the announcement that one of them is going to betray him, and then the discussion, who's it going to be? And then if we take it chronologically, verse 24 would be, then they all start arguing about who's the greatest. So let me read it. Verse 24. And there arose also a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. But let him who is the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as the servant. For who is the greater, the one who reclines at table, or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at table? But I am among you as the one who serves. And you are those who have stood by me in my trials. And just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on the thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So that's the passage. We're not going to finish the rest of that portion today. We're going to finish just what I read. So what we have, what Luke, when he says, now it came to pass, what he's doing is he's shaken up and put 11 o'clock at the top. In other words, in the Bible, it's 11 o'clock, but really it's actually 9 o'clock. Remember in verse 13, Peter and John went and everything happened the way they said, and they prepared the Passover. So they come in. If we go to the Gospel of John, which we're not going to do, we find that everything's prepared, and there's the water, and there's the towel, but there's nobody there but the 12 guys and Jesus. So the 13 guys. So who is going to wash everyone's feet? Which is necessary, not just personal hygiene, but it's necessary for the aspect of being clean in order to eat the dinner. Who's going to do it? That's where I believe verse 24 comes in. And it came to pass that there arose a dispute among them as to which one of them might be thought of, or might be considered, or might be regarded as the greater. So, stop. Everybody enters in. Everybody's standing around. There's the bowl for to wash the feet. There's the towel to wash the feet. And who does what? While the boys are all discussing on, hey, it's not my job. No, Jake should do it. No, Dean should do it. No, Jay should do it. He's the oldest. Well, he's not. But. Yeah. And Jay said, no, Rocky's the guy. Well, Paul is the senior here, so Paul should do it. So that's what's going on here. What's Jesus doing? Takes off his outer robe, bends down, has the bowl in front of him, has the towel over his shoulder, I don't know, in his hand. I don't know where they kept the towel. Anyway, it goes like this. And so one of them comes forward and he washes their feet and dries their feet. And they move on. Next guy. Finally gets to Peter, and that whole story, I'm not going to preach that story. So Jesus washes their feet while they're arguing on, not my job. Well, let Jake do it. No, let Rocky do it. No, Paul's the oldest. So what are they doing? Well, stop and think where their focus is. I mean, that's why I went over what I did in verses 1 through verse 23, is to give you the background on the vitriolic nature of where they're at. They're in Jerusalem, but everybody that possibly could wants to kill them. Not the people, but the leadership. They want to kill him. And here they are talking about, not my job, not my job. Where's their focus? Their focus is on number one. Can they focus on Jesus if they're focused on number one? Can you imagine you standing there arguing on whether one of you guys should do the washing of the feet, and everybody all of a sudden looks, maybe at the same time? Oh, and there he is on his knees. So verse 24, we have to regard as at the dinner hasn't been served. Jesus hasn't said any of those things yet. They all come in and they're arguing, who's going to wash? I'm not going to wash your feet. That's not my job. So who's the greater? Whose rank is greater? I can just hear Peter and John saying, not us. Good grief, Jesus told us to get this all ready. We've already done our job. Hello, Andrew. Not me. Thaddeus? Judas. So, they had the wrong focus. You can imagine what a wonderful feeling, atmosphere there was in the room. Because it's all about me. And here's Jesus right there. So what does Jesus do? Verse 25. Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles. That word is ethnos. There's no problem with translating it as Gentiles. I like to translate it as nations. Same word. And certainly the Gentiles are the nations. But because of the nature of how often the nations are going to be used in prophecy, I would just... It's not a problem to read it as Gentiles because it's the same word. But I just like to look at it as the kings of the nations. And who are them? Everybody that's not a Jew. So here we are, me and the 12 of you, okay? Me and the 12 of you. The kings of the nations, everybody that's not us, lord it over them. That's what the kings of the nations do. They lord it over. They're lording. They're the guys in charge. And those exercising authority over the nations are called benefactors. Now, when I started this, I had the opinion that Jesus was, this was a tongue-in-cheek thing. I think you would get it if I used the word Gavin Newsom, because he thinks he's the benefactor of California. Just ask him. He's doing a good job. But Josephus uses this word as an actual, what the people called the leaders. That the leaders were the benefactors of the people. And I'm sitting there scratching my head. Is it one of those things where, like Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus the madman, sends one of his he's going to have a parade for himself and sends his soldiers to your door, knocks and said there's a parade. And the understanding is you're going to show up and you're going to go clap and cheer. It's because he's the benefactor. It could be that, or it could just be the lunacy of people that look at somebody like Stalin and say, yay, Stalin. But that's the nature of the world. It's the nature of the world. You have kings lording it over, and then those who exercise the authority over the nations, they're considered the guys who dole out the goods. Okay? the next statement, and by the way, that's the reality. That's the nature of the world. That's the reality. The next thing he says in verse 26, and it's kind of like you don't get it in the English because the first word is you. So we have on the one hand, in verse 25, the kings of the nations, and then we have in verse 26, the first word is you. Now, you, not thus. Or if you want to say it, you, not so much. That's not how you function. That's what he's saying. Not you. Not you. You. Not so much. Then he has that, I always refer to it as the big, larger adversative, the but. But the greater among you. Because that's what you guys were discussing, right? The greater among you, let him become as the younger, or the youngest. Let him be as the youngest. Let him become. It's the word for coming into existence. We oftentimes translate it as be, exist in that condition. So you can read it as the New American Standard, must become like, because it's an imperative, or as the King James, let him be as. Either way works. I like the word become because it's moving as opposed to be, which is static, but both work. Let him be as the younger. And if you don't get that concept, when Dean goes to these in-faith conferences, he's definitely among the younger. So if he gets up and speaks, and there's all these old dogs, which are just a couple years younger than me, who've been in the mission for 30, 40, 50 years, who's going to listen to who? Are they going to listen to the neophyte? No. So what the greater among you, because that's the phrase that Luke used. There was a dispute that arose among them as to who was the greater. Jesus says, let the greater among you become as the younger. There's no power in the younger. No one listens to the younger. I can tell you that. I moved onto the field at 23 years old. The youngest pastor was my father's age. The oldest pastor was my grandfather's age. Do you think any of those guys listened to me? Nobody listened to me. What's funny is about 10, 15 years later, I said the same things I did when I was young, and they actually listened to me. Why? Because I was older. So you get the concept here. The greater among you, let him be as the younger. And the one leading, I'll tell you this, there's no question that Peter was a leader. No question at all. Nobody would question that. He may have been a nitwit, but he was a nitwit leader. People actually listened to him. Sometimes they scratch their head. And the one leading, let him be as the deacon. That's what that word is. Diaconate. Servant. One who attends to. So Jesus just turned everything upside down. Jesus turned everything upside down. Become someone other than what the world's pattern is. The world's pattern, if you lead, you're number one. You're number one. You lord it over. You point, say, you do it. It's your turn. Jesus said, oh no. Be as the servant. And that's why in your notes, that's all in yellow, because that is used 3 times in this very short didactic that Jesus gives. So Jesus turns it all upside down, and then he brings in one more example before we're done with the first 4 verses. Verse 27. He asks this question that the way it's written in the Greek is the answer is understood what it's going to be. He says, "For who is greater? The one who is sitting at the table," just like yesterday when Dean and Christiana and I sat down at the table with the other people around the table. Never once did I look at the kitchen, because those people were serving us. Who was the most important people in the room? The ones that the kitchen people were serving. Everybody sitting at the table. That's what Jesus is saying. The logic of this situation that I'm talking about, who is the greater? The one sitting at the table, or the one serving the one sitting at the table? And everybody, it's understood. And Jesus' answer is, isn't it the one that's sitting at the table? And everybody would go, yeah. Is this a trick question? Then Jesus says a closing remark in verse 27. And in my personal notes here, I circled 2 things. S, I now, myself, in the midst of you, am as a servant. Now you have to stop. I can't do it for you. You have to stop and look at Jesus. Look at your Jesus. Is Jesus standing up teaching? Is Jesus bending down ministering to a lame or to a blind or to a leper? Is Jesus walking on water? You need to see him as he just described himself. Squatting down on the ground in front of a bowl of water, washing people's stinky, dirty feet. So Jesus laid out the reality and says, who's the greater? The one sitting at the table or the one serving? And everybody would answer, because that's the answer. The one sitting at the table. And then he says, I myself am in your midst as a servant. Now, if that didn't reach out and slap 12 of those guys, because they all had hearts, they did. They all had hearts. And I think every one of them was slapped across the face. So, the world has it one way, but what does Jesus emphasize? What does Jesus connect with? Serving. He is the supreme example. And by the way, in case you think, well, yeah, okay, it's kind of a big deal. I mean, it's not that big a deal. Well, stop. What's going to happen within the next 24 hours? How is Jesus going to serve not just the 12, but the entire human race? What's he going to do? He's going to extend his hands, his face, his back, his feet, and he's going to serve the entire human race by hanging on the cross. So, you can say, not a big deal. Well, how about this? Is this a big deal? So, this is nothing compared with what he is facing. In their midst, Jesus ought to be the center. Instead, by their pettiness, by their inappropriate focus upon themselves, they made him to serve them because they wouldn't. So he did. Do you think this would have affected their thinking in the future? Do you think at some point when they're in Pergamum, or they're in Parthia, or they're in Babylon, or Egypt, or Libya, or Gaul, that they're ministering to people and all the people are, you're ugly, you're stupid, all these things, that they might not remember that Jesus served them? Do you think they might not remember that? It's a picture we need to remember. It's a picture we need to see. For today, we're going to continue with just 3 more verses, 28, 29, 30. And I see this, actually I see the next portion with Simon, or with Peter also connected, but I knew we wouldn't have time, so I didn't even worry about it. 28, and he continues now with a teaching, and you are those who have stood by me in my trials. Now, this is a perfect tense. And some of these things we miss until all of a sudden we go, whoa, they have remained through with him in his testings. Keep in mind, the vitriol that is against Jesus they were not benign bystanders. I mean, stop and think if they associated Jesus as a empty-headed backwoods preacher, well, how would they esteem or think about the followers of that one? So the vitriol against Jesus is poured out against them as well. And yet Jesus gives us amazing insight. He says, you are the ones, you are they that have remained constant. There's a dia built into this word, which means through. So it's not just staying, but it's staying all the way through. And the perfect tense, you started here with me 3.5 years ago, and you're still seated with me here, or standing with me here in my testings. Not temptations. Temptations is always a word that is in the context. If it's meant for evil, it's a temptation. If it's meant for good, then it's a test in order that good may come out of it. And I don't believe these are temptations. There was only the one temptation at the beginning, and that was in the wilderness, and nobody was there but Jesus. So I believe it's the word trials. So verse 28, again, the first word is you. You are the ones who have continued, who have stood by, who have remained through with me in my situation and in my trials. And in verse 29, and I. So again, we have this you and me. And I am appointing or assigning you, even as was assigned to me by my Father, a kingdom. What? Wait, stop. I am appointing to you, even as my Father has appointed to me, a kingdom. Whoa, stop, whoa. Can you imagine standing there as these boys? Jesus has just given them a topsy-turvy thing about serving, and then flip on that, and you guys are the ones. You guys are the ones. I'm eyeballing all 12 of you, even though I'm going to say something in a little bit about one of you, Judas, who I won't name at this time. But you are going to have a kingdom. I've appointed you a kingdom. My Father's appointed me a kingdom. By the way, a concept that because the kingdom of God continually travels through the book of Luke, right? I mean, we saw that in the first chapter, right? The kingdom of God. I finally understood why the kingdom of God is so difficult for people to explain. It's because it's a moving target. Not going back and forth, but about the time you think it's right here, it's moved down to here. And so you finally get to there, and it's moved down to here. And you finally get to here, and it's moved down to here. And now we get here, and what's Jesus doing? He's pointing down there. And so he is talking about the discussion here. Jesus forwards the discussion not to life after he ascends, not to life after the week after, he's crucified, and then all that, then he ascends into heaven. Not this, a kingdom, but a kingdom after this life. Again, forward motion by Jesus, pointing in that direction. You and I are waiting for that. And he says it here by way of forward motion, forward looking ahead. He says, and I on my part am assigning to you, even as my Father assigned to me, a kingdom. That, this is where he finishes, in order that you might eat and you might drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit upon thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Man, I tell you, I am glad that I am 2,000 years later, and in my life, 50 years, 60 years of having known Jesus and read the Bible, that I can look at this and contemplate and not be slapped quite so much as these guys. 1 minute, he's saying, I'm going to show you a better way. I'm going to turn your concepts upside down. I want you to serve. By the way, you guys are the ones that have remained faithful with me all through all of this. And I'm assigning you a kingdom, just as the Father has assigned me a kingdom. And you guys are going to, in my kingdom, at my table, you're going to eat. And you are going to sit upon thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm just going to say that's big. So, as we finish up here, he begins in verse 28 with you. It's a beautiful picture of their constancy. And what's amazing here, because I've said it before over the years, I think I said it just recently, that God's grace is continually extended. Jesus' grace is continually extended through this whole evening until the time when finally Jesus says, what you have to do quickly. And so Judas gets up and does what he has to do. But this is God's grace, Jesus' grace extended. And it's a beautiful picture of his constancy with the theme of faithfulness, because it's their faithfulness. They have remained faithful, minus the one. And then, so over here we have the action on the part of the followers, and in verse 29 and 30 we have, that was you, and then in verse 29 and 30 is me, and Jesus said, this is your reward. So even here, in this evening, in fact it's before the meal, he's giving them a sermonette, talking about, you guys are going to be a part of my kingdom, at my table, on thrones, and you are going to judge. By the way, you'll notice he doesn't say 12 thrones. He says thrones and then 12 tribes of Israel. Not 12 thrones, because one of them is going to be gone. So, I conclude this way with a simple question. Is it worth it to be faithful, constant, and true to Jesus? There will be trials. There will be hardships. There will be loss. There will be misunderstanding. There will be persecution. But is there a reward on the other side? Yes, there is. So, is it worth it to be faithful and true to Jesus? Yes, it is. Father, to your glory, we are grateful for what our Jesus did. We are grateful for what our Jesus gave us. We are grateful for these vignettes that Luke, who is the only one who gave us some of these things, chose in his sleuthing to uncover what actually happened, and then he shares it with us. And we, Father, 2,000 years later, are confronted with who's the greatest in your church, Lord? Who's the great? Is it me? The beauty, Father, that true followers of Christ understand is no, the greatest in your church is you. And the rest of us are just servants. So, Lord, I do ask that you would bless each one of us in our service. And I ask that you would give us that spirit of faithfulness to do for you what you ask us to do. And I do pray these things in the name of the Master, Jesus Christ. Amen.